Alright everyone, so we're going to try this out for the first time. Today what we're going to talk about a little bit is some wood joinery we've talked about a little bit in class before. What we're going to be talking about is mortise and tenoning. So what we have here, most basic terms, a mortise is a pocket, usually cut in a piece of wood. The tenon is something that's going to fit inside that. Sometimes it might not go the whole way through. In this case, we have a tenon. It's going to go the whole way through this mortise. Okay. Specifically, this is going to be a wedged or a tusk tenon. We're going to have a wedge that drops the whole way down through, locks us in place. This is the framework for my foot-powered lathe I built a while back. Seasonal movement. The wood's swelled a little bit, so the joints don't fit a little too tight right now. So what we're going to do is we're going to take hand plane. We're going to take a couple passes across, a little bit at a time, just till we sneak up on it so that it fits in here with a pretty smooth fit. I have one of my homemade clamp here just to kind of secure this while we work on it right here outside because it's so nice today. We don't want to take too many passes. We don't want it to fit too loose. See how that fits. And that actually fits in really nice and tight. So let's do the same thing to the other side. If we force that into the clamp, it'll actually, how this clamp's built, it self-tightens. We built a few of those in Advanced Wood the other year. A couple people helped me make a few of these. And that tenon, it's all done. It fits in both sides of the lathe really nice and snug. So what we have here is we have two more of these to do. Not really that big of a deal. Shouldn't take long at all. So we'll make sure I try to work off the bottom, kind of keep, or the top, I'm sorry, to keep everything somewhat even in my lathe. It's not as big of a deal as maybe an engine lathe in the metal shop, but it's still, you want to try to keep these as close to the same as possible. See how that works. That's just about perfect. Next one. If you're careful with how you make these tenons, really, there's not a ton of trimming we usually have to do. My mortises were made to size. After they're opened up, I really don't touch those again. Any precision fitting, I'm going to do it to the tenon that actually fits in there because it's a little bit easier to get to, okay? So let's see if that worked for me on this side now. And it's a hair snug, but it'll still fit without causing any undue pressure. Take a couple on this one. At. Perfect. Hopefully this is our last one. Pretty good. Pretty good. Okay, now as far as putting this together, it's fairly simple and straightforward. Let me adjust some things here real quick so we can kind of see how this goes together. Actually, I think we have a pretty good view of it right there. Now what I like to do is I like to take my pieces and I'll pick one side to work from when I actually assemble this lathe. Now, Make sure I'm set up correctly here. There we go. All three of these pieces are basically there to make sure that the lathe stays nice and square with each other. I have my two pieces up here that are parallel. They're actually the ways of the lathe. They're what, my tool rest is going to slide on. We've used the lathe in shop before, not a foot-powered one, all of us are powered ones. We'll see. Hopefully we're back to school before this happens, but if we have to do many more of these videos, what I'm planning on doing is I'll start doing some turning on my powered lathe in my shop right here, just to kind of keep you guys fresh in what we've gone over in class. Anyways, back to fitting these tenons. I have the 3 tenons fit into my headstock side of my lathe. Now the last things I need to do, over here I have my springs for this. Now, what I have are 2 pieces of hickory. The hickory was chosen for a couple main reasons. Now, first being, it has very high resiliency, a lot of spring to it. Number 2, I had a decent amount laying around in my shop when I built this lathe, so that's another big reason. But it works very well. This is actually a wooden spring that's going to allow this to move back and forth. And before I actually put anything else on, I have to get my adjuster for spring tension here. I have it sitting over here. And all that is a piece of copper. And all we did, I actually split a piece of copper pipe, wrapped it, riveted it together. I think you can see that there. And all that's going to do is slide along those 2 springs and actually allow me to increase or decrease the amount of spring tension I have. So it doesn't matter exactly where it sits right now, because I'm not actually ready to do anything as far as that goes. Now, my next step, which can be a little tricky by yourself, what I need to do is I actually need to line up all 5 of these pieces at the same time. So my 2 springs and my 3 support pieces that have my tenons cut into the side. So we'll see how this goes with one person. We're almost there. What we'll do is we'll heat up just a little bit on this last spring to kind of allow me to get a little bit more leverage there. We'll use a little bit of a persuader now. Alright, so right there, I'm about ready to set this up. Now, my tenon's seated perfect on the top right now. What I need to do is I'm going to stand this piece up, and hopefully I'll be able to just press my headstock piece straight in. Then we're going to see what I'm talking about by these tusk or wedged mortise tenons, okay? So here we go. Alright, so my bottom spring rod actually moved a little bit, which isn't that big of a deal. I actually have it supported right now, so I'm okay. Now, the big thing I have to do, I'm going to get some of my wedges out. Now, these are fairly simple. All they are red oak angles, okay? Red oak because we know it's a rather dense, strong hardwood. We live in north central PA, so it is relatively inexpensive to get a hold of, and it's fairly common for our area, so it's a good choice for this kind of work. The frame of the lathe itself, the head and footboard are actually pine that we've milled at Logs to Lumber, but for the ways I used some maple, and the support in the center is actually oak, just for the strength that I wanted it to have. So, what we're going to do first off, I'm going to take some of these wedges on the other side. I'm going to actually drive them in. That way, we can work on this side so that you can actually see me putting this together. Let me get my pieces figured out here. Okay. So, all I do is drop those wedges in there. What I'm going to do is, I'm actually going to pull this top spring out really fast because I need to be able to drive these wedges in, again, with my mallet. Alright. Those are nice and solid now. No issue there. Shouldn't have any problems with that coming loose while we're working either. So now, what's next? Well, we need to make sure we seat the shoulders of these tenons in there. So, let's see exactly how much effort this is going to take. Get my block here again, that way I don't mess up the spine. We'll just keep working it back and forth. In fact, I think what we're going to do is we're just going to flip this up on its end now that it's secure. Go ahead and try to drive those in a little bit. Try this one more time, taking the hinge out, or taking the spring out, just to see if that'll help me get a little bit more of a purchase on this. So that should help us now. Alright, so now what I have, that is nicely supported on all of my tenons sticking out the other side of the mortise. There we go. One last time now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use the mallet . Alright, so before I go any further and stand this up and possibly mess up something, I'm actually going to slide my wedges in there just to kind of lock this so nothing moves when I stand this up. All right. We'll kind of wedge that there for the time being until I actually get this set. So, what I have right there is everything looks pretty good. I'm going to start by driving these in and seeing if these will help pull in the actual tenon snug into the mortises that we trued up a little bit earlier. There we go. Those have seated some now. Now what I can do is finish driving those in to make sure this stays nice and secure. This side's a little bit snug, so we're going to use another wedge to help drive that through. And the last one that's going to go in Alright, those are finally in. So, the framework's together. The only thing left really, as far as setting this up, is I do need to put the second spring in. It's fairly straightforward. There's a slot in this tailstock side. And all I'm going to do is slide that through my spring tensioner, which I'm going to slide that down to give me a little bit less tension. That looks good. So what we have is we actually have this all set up now. Everything's nice and tight. In a second we'll actually get the camera over here so you can see how the tenons actually fit in there. Now, talking a little bit about how I made these mortise and tenons. I know we haven't talked a ton about that. So basically, I did a fairly simple layout where these needed to go, and I took my measurements so everything was parallel. I actually started out, I know the video I've given you this week for class shows how you can chop a mortise straight by hand with a chisel. I actually used a drill press to open up initially, and I actually used the chisel then to just kind of pare the excess away so it was nice and rectangular sides. The tenons on this, I did a little bit easier. I actually used the bandsaw. I actually came straight in this way, and then I actually used the Festool miter saw in the shop. My advanced kids remember we use that sometimes to cut a stop dado. So I actually set that up so I could cut basically a dado across the top, and it removed that cheek piece that is slid in here. And you saw that we had to do a little bit of fitting on the top, not so much the bottom, just those tops, just to skim it so that it would actually fit back into my framework here. The springs, again, also mortise and tenon. Basically, it's more like we took a square piece of stock, made round ends, and fitted into a drilled hole. So that's even easier. but it's still a sample of a mortise and tenon joint. So, we have a few other pieces to put on this, and then we can actually see how this thing works. Now, as far as how it works, it's reciprocal motion. You've had me in 7th grade, Mr. Bressler in 8th grade. Reciprocal motion, we know scroll saw, back and forth. So the scroll saw we know only cuts on the downstroke of the scroll saw. Some of you seem to think it cuts both ways, and that's how we wind up with bent blades, S-shaped blades, blades that turn different colors and leave a smell of smoke like you tell me. Now, this lathe is also reciprocal motion, just like the scroll saws. It's a Springpole Lathe. So what we have here, the springs actually are going to pull down. So when I push on this treadle, it's flexing my spring pole up. When I take the pressure off of my foot, off that treadle, this piece of hickory is going to pull back down and spin my work the other direction. So, reciprocal motion, give and take, push, pull, whatever. Just like the scroll saws only cut on the downstroke of the scroll saws and the up's kind of a resting stroke, the Springpole Lathe is only going to cut when I step down. It's only spinning the work against my chisel on the step. When I release my foot, it spins the other way and it's not going to take a cut. So most of the time what we want to do when we use it is we actually don't allow the chisel to rest on the work as it spins backwards. We move it back off just a little bit, and then we press back on. We put the tool back to the work. Now, basic tools that we use while we're using one of these lathes. I keep my mallet with the lathe. Mallet's one example of something we can actually make not only with a powered lathe, but on one of these Springpole lathes. Fairly simple turning. That was out of just a piece of firewood laying around somewhere. Some other things now are my lathe chisels, and I actually made these specifically for this. And we'll come closer so you can see what they are. Now, first off, I have two skew chisels. Now, when we use the power lathe at school, most of those tools, actually all of them, are high-speed steel. So they can withstand the higher heat from the lathe running at that high speed. High-speed steel might not take as fine of an edge as something like high-carbon steel like this is. This is a piece of tool steel that we always buy in the shop because the Advanced Wood 2 kids, they make their hand planes in the shop, and then we actually send out the material to have it heat treated at a local shop. So when we started making this lathe the other year, I actually took some stock and had made up a couple chisels for it, and I had them do the heat treating for me. The other one that I actually have is a very wide, it's a 2-inch, just a flat chisel. They take a very sharp edge, and you actually need a razor sharp edge to be able to do any turning on one of these lathes, because with a powered lathe you might be able to get away with a little bit duller tool because the high speed is just going to rip the stock away anyways. It might not be a very finished result, but it would work. With a Springpole lathe, if you don't have a very sharp tool, you're not going to get really any results at all. Now, for this week, I just wanted to go over basically the mortise and tenons, how this went together, kind of what this Springpole lathe is, how it works, what it does. Hopefully we're back to school before I make another one of these videos. That way we can maybe talk about this in the shop. I can bring this in, show you in person in class. Otherwise, next week we'll try to have a video about how to use this and maybe get into a little bit with my powered lathe in here. And depending on how long we don't have class for, my plan is possibly just to start putting up some videos of some projects we can do on the lathe, just to kind of as a refresher course for all of you, since it's been a while since we had class. So before we wrap things up, I'm going to just grab the camera we'll take a look at what the mortise and tenon, those tusk wedges look like, and then we'll be done. So, what we have there, you can see on this side, it's kind of hard to see with that sun, really nice and tight up against the framework. And then on this side, you can see how those wedges are drawing this all in there. You can see how down here, those springs are actually fitting up here in that bottom dot. Walk around. You can also see the treadle, how it mounts into the feet of the frame itself. All those are just notches with a couple pieces of brass. Brass just because it's going to last a little bit longer than, you know, a wooden dowel rod. Now, with the tool rest here, a lot of times with a Springpole lathe, it's just a simple piece of wood. I actually prefer how my wood lathe rest works, so I made one that pretty much mimics how my lathe rest works. I can move this wherever I need it. It locks down. I can twist this knob down here and move my tool rest however I need it. Really, the only piece of metal in this is this little bit of aluminum that connects the arm at the top and the spring with the bottom. Alright, so that's all for this week. I hope to see you guys in class soon. Until then, take care.